I'm going to officially kick things off here. Just welcome everyone. This is the Business Agility Learning Series today. And this learning series is a event that we have leading up to the Business Agility Conference global event. That's going to be happening March 22nd through 25th. And just a few call outs around that here as we get started is it is truly a global conference. All the way from Asia to the Americas over those 4 days, there's going to be speakers and thought leaders telling their stories and opportunities to learn during that. Also, I'd like to call out tickets for that are pretty affordably priced, and the proceeds for all those tickets are going to Doctors Without Borders. So a very good cause for that. I'm hoping people who are joining today could also join us at the conference on the 22nd. I'll pop in some links in the window so you can check that out. But now more about today's session. So it is being recorded, just a reminder around that. It should be where when you're coming in, you're going to be on mute. If you have questions, we have moderators who are looking at those. Use the chat box. Maybe towards the end, we'll do some Q&A with where we could unmute you, but use the chat box as the default. But now I want to talk about the topic and the presenters I'm really excited to have here today. Our presenters are Kim Poremski and John Mulligan. We're both principal consultants at Applied Frameworks. And they really do work that is broad reaching across organizations and teams. They're introducing to new ways of working, innovative ways of keeping things like the retrospective engaging and being able to scale it bigger and broader. And that's what the topic is today. The topic for our learning series is baby walruses, icebergs, and large-scale retrospectives, and they have everything to do with successful business agility. What exactly that means, I'm not totally certain, but that's why I'm here today, and I'm looking forward to it. So I'm going to kick it over to you, Kim and John, to tell us more about it.
Okay, well, I really appreciate that introduction, Ross. Thank you so much. That it is a lengthy title, so you read it well, so I won't go ahead and repeat it, but I do say good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're joining us from today. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to be with us and to hopefully learn something new. So we're excited to have you here. My name is Kim Poremski, and I'm joined by my colleague, John Mulligan. And as Ross said, we are principal consultants with Applied Frameworks. I've been an Agilist since about the 2008 timeframe. I've worked in numerous industries, focused primarily in the finance and insurance space, but also healthcare. And I absolutely love my role as a consultant where I can work with clients across the country and even the globe, quite frankly, to help with their agile journeys. So I'm coming to you from Charleston, South Carolina. You can see my background is the iconic Rainbow Row, and it's actually a beautiful day outside. And so I'm looking forward to warmer weather. I'll kick it over to John so he can introduce himself as well.
Hello, everybody. I'm John Mulligan. I am in beautiful Richmond, Virginia, which is also my background, and it looks, in fact, exactly like that today. Beautiful 70-degree day here in Richmond. So I have been doing Agile since around 2005 in a variety of roles at many different companies, from Scrum Master to Product Owner to Release Train Engineer and Agile Coach and Consultant. So I've got a lot of experience in many different areas, and that's actually how Kim and I both met Ross, working with him in a prior engagement. So looking forward to having this opportunity to talk with you guys today.
Absolutely. And then even though we do not have her picture featured on a slide, we would be remiss if we did not introduce our other Applied Frameworks colleague, Laura Caldy. She is on the video here with us, and she's going to be helping us out with a little bit of behind the scenes for our session today. So Laura, do you want to say a few words? You're on mute.
Hey, I have to be the one who makes somebody say that. It's required in every meeting. No, it's great to meet all of you. And thank you for being here. Kim and John, you're in great hands with the both of these guys. But I love talking about this stuff. And so I offered to jump in and help with Q&A, and we're going to be doing an interactive activity towards midway through. And so it's always nice to have somebody who's in the background, just making sure that people's questions get answered. So that's my job today. It's great to meet you all, and I'll turn it back over to Kim.
Okay, great. Well, before we actually jump into the presentation, I am always curious when we do these types of things, like, well, what are people, where are they coming from in terms of not necessarily your location in the world, but what role do you currently play, in your organization that prompted you to join this session today? So if you have a keyboard handy, if you could just type in the chat what your role is, I'm just really interested to see where people are coming from. All right, Jeff, a fellow Agile coach, lots of Agile coaches here, transformation leader, Scrum Master, very cool. All right, so we have a variety of roles. Thank you for sharing that. And one of the things that I really like about this topic is that it's applicable to many organizations and it's applicable to many roles. So it's not like, this is really only great if you're a Scrum Master, or it's really only great if you're a coach. So again, I hope that you'll be able to take something away from our session today, and we will move forward. Okay. So I will say that I'll almost place a bet that some of you probably saw the title of this talk and said, baby walruses, icebergs, what? Like, all right, I'll bite. I'll join this session because I want to learn a little bit more about large scale retrospectives, but I'm not sure about this whole baby walrus thing. And then others of you may have said, baby walruses, I'm in, count me in. Anything that has cuteness overload, I'm there. So either way, we hope that we can oblige all of you today in some way, shape, or form. But I do want to let you know that we very intentionally did pick the title for this presentation because we do think that there is a strong connection. So I kind of wanted to at least take a minute to explain what we think that is and give you a little bit of background. So, first of all, when I'm talking about baby walruses, and you can see the picture here, I'm talking about the Arctic. I'm thinking about Arctic waterways. So if you think about the Bering Strait, the Hudson Strait, any of those waterways, they are experiencing some of their lowest levels of ice in years. And that in turn is prompting all this development, like gas exploration and oil exploration, as well as a significant increase in shipping traffic. And that is in turn impacting wildlife ecosystems. In fact, the Bering Strait is known as the marine mammal superhighway because it has such a large population of seabirds and polar bears and walruses and whales and so forth. So while World Wildlife Federation advocates are trying to figure out ways that they can ensure that the development in the Arctic is occurring in a much more environmentally and socially responsible way. And so what they've done in recent years is they have developed maps to identify the most environmentally and socially responsible ways that they can use these waterways for this shipping traffic. So, this is an example of a map that they have created, and it highlights things like polar bear denning areas and wildlife hazards and where are the heavy seal distributions and all of that. And then let mariners use these guides to be able to navigate the waterways and avoid these potential hazards, but also preserve the wildlife in the area. So now let's consider an organization that is going through an agile transformation, right? They're entering into uncharted waters. They want to forge new paths forward, but they also need to be able to understand and sustain the organizational ecosystem that's going to propel them forward. And then similarly, they also need to be aware of the hazards that lie ahead, right? Like, what are those hidden icebergs in the organization or surrounding the organization that could potentially sink their efforts? And so wouldn't it be great if we could create an organizational map, just like the one that the World Wildlife Federation created, to navigate these Arctic waterways? Well, in our experience, organizations can use large-scale retrospectives to build these maps. So what exactly is a large-scale retrospective, and why does your organization need one? Well, simply put, it is a technique for scaling change across the organization by conducting a series of small retrospectives. And the key is that you want to use the same framework for every team, and you want to use the same central question to focus participants' responses. Now, typically when you hear the term retrospective, people most likely think of a team-level retrospective event within Scrum. And while these team-level events can certainly increase the team's outcomes and engagement, they do tend to focus a little bit more on, well, what's within the team's control, or maybe a little bit beyond that. But as you can see from this diagram, there's many layers of control within an organization. And it's that broader scope of control that we need to evaluate within the context of an organizational transformation. And that's what we can tap into using large-scale retrospectives. Now, any transformation is rooted in change management. And I'm sure some of you on the call are familiar with Dr. John Kotter's 8-step change model. I mean, he literally wrote the book on change management, and those steps are just as relevant today as when he first introduced it decades ago. And so if we look at the first 3 steps here, creating urgency, forming a powerful coalition, creating a vision for change, these are the things that leadership is primarily doing, right? There's always some sort of catalyst. There's always some sort of burning platform for change that creates urgency. And so the leadership team's coming together and they're saying, yes, we need to do this. We're going to work on this together. And they create a strategic vision for how they want the future to be different from the past. But there's more to do beyond that, right? Like they need to communicate that vision, and they need to determine, well, how do we make this a reality with actual and tangible actions and outcomes? And you want your people in the organization to buy into the need for change and the urgency for change. So this is where we believe that large-scale retrospectives can play a really key role in the change process, because it's human nature that people are going to be more likely to support change when they feel like they have a voice in the process and in the future outcomes. And every individual brings unique perspectives, and they have different experiences that can highlight obstacles that might lie ahead. And they can bring their perspectives as to what they think success would look like. So when you engage in large-scale retrospectives that are inclusive of more people, it gives individuals in the organization an equal and active voice. Oh, there we go. My slide didn't want to advance. So LSRs, in our opinion, fulfill many purposes. When we conduct them for our clients, we identify a lot of different areas for improvement, but obviously you can't do everything at once. So by analyzing the data that results from an LSR, you can identify the best areas of improvement. Where do you want to focus first? And best can mean different things to different organizations. So it's going to really help you to hone in on what that is. You'll also be able to identify what needs to be preserved in your organization. These are the baby walruses. What are the things that are working well and we don't want to disrupt them, or we may actually want to proliferate them. So we need to understand what those are. And then LSRs also reveal the obstacles to change, right? These are your icebergs. My clicking's not going well. There we go. These are your icebergs. And so you might have seen things on the surface and kind of known that they were there, but maybe you didn't realize how impactful they actually were. Or even worse, they might have been hidden entirely until now, but LSRs are going to bring those to the surface. And then because you will have engaged a large population of participants, you're going to have a better reassurance that the feedback is accurate and more aligned versus taking the word of just a handful of people, because now you've got this broad spectrum of feedback that you can analyze. And then armed with that new data, you can build your action plan, right? This is your mariner's map. And so then you can plan the course, and then you establish your success metrics. And then you're going to want to repeat this LSR process about every 3 to 6 months. Because just like the Arctic seas are always changing and new maps have to be developed over time, you can reassess where your organization is now, right? What successes have you had? What efforts have fallen short? What's new in the organizational ecosystem that we need to address? Maybe there are things we have to work on, or things we need to protect, or things we need to avoid. So what are all of those things? The other thing that large-scale retrospectives do for us is ensuring that we have a clear understanding of the current state or the starting point, right? If you need to get to New York, but you don't know if you're in Miami, Florida, or if you're at the Miami University in Ohio, it makes it a little bit difficult to chart your path. So you have to actually know where you are first. And it is quite common for leadership to have one perspective of how things are currently working when the reality might be very different. So that's a little overview of what large-scale retrospectives are, why we believe organizations need them. So I do want to turn it over to John. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and let John share so he can talk to us a little bit about how do you actually plan for and execute a large-scale retrospective. In fact, Laura, maybe while John is doing that, are there any questions that have come up that we should chat about, or are we good?
I think we're good, except for I'm going to throw one at you anyway. So when you talk about including more people, you know, sometimes I have heard people say, well, look, I can't invite 10,000 people to the retrospective because I don't have authority to do that. My organization is a smaller part of the whole, and I have 1,000 people, you know, or I have 500 people. And so I think you're talking about pick as big of a group as you have access to, and there is a limit, right? So I don't know if you have any experience on how big should they be.
Well, you know, I do think that when we say small retrospectives, we obviously want to keep each of the actual sessions small, but you have to assess what is the scope of the change that you're trying to make. And then if it's a matter of, I don't have access to some of these folks, you know, do you have, going back to Cotter's model, like who is in your coalition for change, right? Does that need to be expanded? Or maybe you actually want to start, you know, with a more defined group and start the catalyst from there. Because again, going back to Cotter's change model, you know, he talks about starting with the small wins. So maybe the small win is that you ultimately want to do an enterprise change, but you're going to start with a particular group, and then you're going to progress from there. So then when an organization sees the successes in one area, then that's how you start to build on that change and proliferate it. So I would say, though, that depending upon the scope of what you are trying to influence, you want as many participants as possible in that scope of influence. Somebody asked, why do you call it a retrospective and not a prospective? You know, I actually think about that all the time because I think, though, and we'll talk about this in a minute, there's what, you know, a particular framing question that you're going to want to use, and John's going to talk about that a little bit. And it requires looking back as well, right? It's not just looking forward. So that's typically why we say that. All right, so I think, John, do you want to get going a while with your section?
You can see my screen,
okay,
right?
Great. I can, yes.
Okay, great. Thanks, everybody, and thank you for all of that. All right, so we're going to actually talk a little bit about how you're going to plan your large-scale retrospective. So the first thing you're going to want to do is you're going to actually pick your framework. So a framework can be multiple different types of frameworks. The picture I'm showing you here is one that we call Speedboat, and we're going to use something quite similar today in an exercise to show you how to actually do this in real life. But you can pick multiple different frameworks, and you'll see a couple more of those as we progress throughout the day here. The next thing you want to look at is, what is your central question? And as Kim just mentioned, you're going to go back and you're going to think through of time, and you're going to try to figure out, well, what problem are we trying to solve? So oftentimes you're looking back 3 to 6 months. You want to actually focus the question so that people aren't giving you questions or answers about just a wide variety of things. You really want to keep it relatively focused. The next thing you want to do is identify the session attendees. And I noticed that there was a question that was in the chat there. So you want to keep the small groups to about 10 people, but the number of 10 people groups that you can have is pretty much unlimited. So we will do small group retrospectives to create this large scale retrospective because we're going to have a whole series of them. Now, typically they're always facilitated, and as a result, oftentimes you can't do them in parallel if you have a limited number of facilitators. So for example, today, Kim and I are both going to be facilitators. So we're going to break you into 2 different groups, but we might actually put you in more than 2 different Zoom groups, depending on how many people are on the call. And it looks like we have just over 20. So we'll probably put you into 2 different Zoom groups today and work on these 2 different retrospectives together. And obviously with all retrospectives, you want to make sure that you're creating a safe space. The results, and we'll talk about this a little while, but the results, as you put them in, are not 100% anonymous, but as a facilitator, we're going to collate the data. And by the time that the data is put together, it is going to ensure complete anonymity of any of the data, so people don't have to worry about what they put into the tool. So the next thing we talk about is just scheduling the sessions, typically an hour to an hour and a half. You can do them virtually or in person. Obviously, in the past, we did quite a few of these in person. Even though we're actually using an online tool, you can often be in the room together. But now the great thing about the tool we're going to use today is that it's designed for remote facilitation. And then the tool we're going to use today is one that's called Collaborate. It's actually been purchased by Scaled Agile. So it's called Safe Collaborate. It was formerly known as Weave, and it's a really cool tool. It has a lot of different things that you can use in a variety of different elements of Agile. So you can use it for product management. You can use it for design thinking. There's a lot of different tools you can use it for. And I'm not here to sell you on Collaborate because I don't have a financial stake in the game, but I'm just saying it's a very useful tool that we use quite a bit. All righty. So if you look at the steps we're going to go through, the first is going to be the series of small group online retrospectives. So we just talked about, creating those groups of roughly 10 people or so and doing as many of those as necessary over a period of a day or, a week or so to gather all the data that's required. The next thing you're going to do is analyze the results. And so one of the reasons Laura is going to be here today is as we're doing this retrospective today and you're creating this the data in the tool, she's going to take a little bit of the data, and it wouldn't obviously in the quick amount of time we have here today, it's not going to be a full analysis, but she's going to pull some of the data out of the tool and we're going to be able to show you exactly how it works. And then from that, you want to identify the themes, your scope of control, and develop some recommendations. And those recommendations are going to help you drive your prioritized backlog for the things that you want to work on going forward. What we find in many of these retrospectives is that oftentimes the results are not what people expect. They might think that there was an issue with, let's say, tools, and it turns out it was an issue with communications. So these things are very useful when you start to get this information from all the people. So we talked about analyzing the data. We really like to develop this among 3 dimensions: people, process, and technology. And then from there, we start to break it down a little bit more. So looking at, are things strategic or are they tactical? And this third one that's called glue is really just, well, what are the things that take strategy and put it into tactics? So sometimes that glue component, we sort of made that word up, but that glue component is the one that brings the things together. And so sometimes it might not be strategy, it might not be tactics, but it's the glue that's actually the problem. So we'll have that in our spreadsheet of results. And then within the scope of control, is this something that's controlled at the team level, within your department, whether it's IT operations, whatever, or is it a larger issue such as at the enterprise level? Or frankly, is it potentially external? Are you working with a government agency and the problems all happen because, and I can tell you right now, I'm working with a current client. And it's a bank, and we have a lot of things. If you guys are familiar with the PPP loan process that was rolled out as a result of COVID, the SBA oftentimes will send out new guidance at about 5 o'clock on a Friday, and it needs to be implemented on Monday. So there's things like that. And so obviously that's very frustrating from the team level. So it's those types of things that you'll find. So good. All right, so here's kind of, and you can't read this probably, you're gonna get all the slides later, by the way. We're gonna be able to put this in a PDF and send it out to everybody. But this is just an example of the type of thing that we do after we pull the results down. So you'll see that there's an item name, and the tool that you're gonna go into, you're gonna have the opportunity to put the item name, and it's your summary, and then you can put a much longer description of the issue, which is very, very helpful to actually understand the issue, because sometimes those little item names are a little bit cryptic. So being able to put something into the description is much more helpful. In this particular example, we were doing the thing called speedboat. So we have anchors and propellers. Anchors are things that slow you down, and propellers are things that make you go. So we have a column there for anchors and propellers. And then we talked about people, process, and technology. So we kind of break it down by that, then tactics, glue, and strategy, and then the scope of control. So you can kind of see how that works. And then from there, you begin to figure out, well, what do we need to do? What competency is related to that? And then once you have that all built out, you're going to analyze the data a little bit more and create theme breakdowns. So these theme breakdowns, so for example, if you look to the left, that big green bar on the left there says culture and mindset. So it turns out culture and mindset, and green is an anchor, or excuse me, a propeller, by the way. So that's something that's really good. And you also see much further on the left, there's also on the right, there's also a culture and mindset that was an anchor. So there was a few things in there, but the propeller component of this far outweighed the anchor component of that. So that's not something that you probably need to focus a lot of effort on. Your culture and mindset is probably pretty good in this organization. However, communication and collaboration, which is the next one there with a lot of anchors, is probably something that you're going to need to focus on. So each one of these is going to have two dimensions. There's typically going to be some propellers and some anchors. And what you're really doing is looking to go, well, where are the majority of these in, so we can make an effort based on that. So good. I'm going to pause for a minute because we're going to go off to some real world examples. But before I toss it back to Kim for some real examples, if there's any additional questions, you want to drop them into the chat, or I wasn't reading the entire chat. Was there something? Oh, the frequency question, 3 to 6 months. Yep, we saw that.
So they're talking about, there was a question about how do we relate anchors and propellers that might be in the same category, right? So we have a bunch of anchors that are in the one category, but we may have twice as many that are in culture and mindset that might be propellers, right? Positive things. So when we're going through the analysis, how do we actually think about having some as anchors and some as propellers? You want to talk about what you think about that, and I can also add my 2 cents into that question.
Yeah, I was to say, I can think of, there's probably examples of, I'm going to use culture and mindset I'll just use culture for example, and I'm going to totally make this up, by the way. So, it could be that somebody put a bunch of propellers because every Friday afternoon, you have happy hour and it's sponsored by the company and everybody's happy about that. The problem is that every Saturday, everybody has to work. So that shows up as an anchor. So there could be things like that where people they like a certain component of it and they don't like another component of it. So it's a balance. I'm not sure if that answered your question or that was just a goofy example, but
yeah, well, it does, I think, reveal what we're going to get into in a minute, which is like looking at any data in only one dimension will give you kind of a false sense of understanding. And so where the power of this really comes into is the layering of frameworks that we use on the analysis side to say, okay, so we do have an interesting mix of maybe propellers and anchors in what we say is a culture and mindset area. But when you start to apply some of the other frameworks to that same set of data, you can start to see, oh, this is related to some team building events that people like, but there's some other things in there that are potentially indicative of maybe the leadership culture and mindset, which is potentially very actionable, right? And so I think one of the questions that came in here was, do you need and what is usual if the management doesn't care about culture and mindset? That's a whole webinar topic in and of itself, but I actually think so far what we found is that there's always something in culture and mindset that is meaningful to leadership. It is not the case where leadership doesn't care about that. What they might not care about is, the party on Friday night thing that John was talking about. But I think that, when you start to unpack that, there's always a dimension in there that is meaningful to stakeholders. And so it's part of what I think, and I'll turn this back over to Kim now, but part of what I think we want to show you is how do we make this, the data and insights that we're looking at, how do we actually make it meaningful and actionable? And it really is the application of multiple frameworks that really start to get at the meat of what is truly important versus things that might already be either not actionable or not relevant to the problem that the company is trying to solve. Kim, I'll turn it back over to you. And,
Great,
definitely,
yeah,
guys,
great.
keep the questions coming, because if I can weave them into the conversation, I will, or we will at least try to answer them in the chat itself.
Absolutely. These are great questions. So glad folks are engaging for sure. So yeah, I'm going to share a couple of real world examples. Obviously, I'm not going to get into specific company names. And you do just keep in mind that when we conduct these large scale retrospectives, we capture a lot of data and insights, and we produce numerous recommendations, right? It's not just one thing, but we obviously have limited time in this session. And so what I was hoping to do is to just sort of give a few slivers of insights to demonstrate what large scale retrospectives can reveal. So just kind of keep that in mind. So first I'll share that we worked with a public services company in Detroit, Michigan. And this canvas that you see here, these are just some representative examples of what the canvases looked like in Safe Collaborate. They've since changed the UI a little bit, but that's actually what gets produced. You actually see anchors and propellers. This is the particular metaphor that we used, but you don't have to use a speedboat metaphor. You could use some other metaphor. Maybe you want to use a race car or something else that resonates with your organization. But in this particular case, we did use speedboat. And as you can see here, when we processed all of the data, we identified quite a few different themes across people, process, and technology. And they were a mix of anchors and propellers, right? Because it's not always going to be one thing. So you're gonna have dimensions of both when it comes to training, perhaps, right? Maybe people feel really happy about training in one area, but not in another, for example. But for this particular organization, when we broke it down, one of the things that we were able to hone in on was that they had a significant issue around their environments. So if you're just looking at a list of issues or themes, as I'm showing here, you might not immediately hone in on, oh yeah, environments, that's what we really should be focusing on first. But when we were able to look at all of that data collectively across many, many teams, we were able to identify that as a big one. So we, in this particular company, they were using like a lot of like a VM related technology, and it was very unstable, a lot of performance issues, access issues and so forth. And then another big thing with environments was around their databases, because they had different versions and the data was not synchronized. And so it created just a lot of problems and angst and wasted time and effort and so forth. And so this became a really great opportunity for them to inspect and adapt. And it kind of gave them their Miami, right? Like, this is where we are right now. This is a small win. If we go back to Cotter, what are some of the small wins that we can immediately focus in on, show that immediate change, and then build on it from there. So that's what we did. Did another LSR for a healthcare company in Chicago, Illinois. Again, we used Speedboat for this one, similar representative canvas. But I wanted to highlight this one because this was a similar sized company to the one in Michigan. And if you look here, and I know we flipped through that other slide pretty quickly, but you might have been able to notice that there are some common themes that came out between both of the companies. But in this particular company's case, they had a significant quality issue. These teams were just buried, and I mean buried, in what they call hot fixes. So they could not get themselves above water here. And so every time they would plan, their new sprints, and they had all of these new features that they wanted to deliver, they were just getting pulled into trying to fix all of these defects. And they didn't have separate teams that could work on that. They had to triage a lot of their own stuff because they didn't have, a separate team that was doing the triage to figure out if it was even an issue in the first place. They didn't have developers writing unit tests. All their testing was manual. And another key component with this organization was that a lot of their work was very client specific. So what would happen is they would fix something for one client and then turn around and break it for another, because there was no way they could possibly manually test for all of the client variations and permutations. So this really came to light, and it wasn't something that they realized was as bad as it was. So in this particular case, we basically were like, okay, first we have to put a halt on some of the newer features, right? We really need to get the house in order and really focus on some of these quality improvements. And then we worked with them to develop, you know, a transformation backlog that included, and this, like I said, this wasn't the whole backlog, but it included things like, all right, we need to get your developers writing unit tests. We need to establish an automated testing framework. We need to restructure how teams are working together right now, because the roles were very separate. Never did a developer do any testing, so we didn't have as many eyes on things. And they were actually also working in a very mini waterfall type approach, where they would do one sprint of development and one sprint of testing. And so then things were being found late in the process. So we were able to, again, identify a lot of these improvements that we could add to their backlog. This became their Miami, Florida. They knew where they were. They knew where they needed to start. They knew this would be a quick win. They knew they had a lot more that they wanted to do to become a more agile organization, but that if they started here, they were going to immediately see positive change. And then lastly, I wanted to highlight a media company that we worked with in Minneapolis, Minnesota. One of the reasons I like this example is because they actually used a different framework. You know, as I said, you can use different metaphors. The work that we did for this company was specific to their HR department. And they, you know, in addition to wanting to understand, okay, where are our strengths and where are our problems? And in this case, since it's a sailboat, it was wind puffs instead of propellers that were moving them forward, right? But they also wanted more input from the larger organization as to what is our vision for the future and what are the risks to getting there. So we, you know, used a different framework to be able to accomplish all of the various goals that they wanted out of this large scale retrospective. And so when we started to delve in and got the results, and I realized this bar chart might be a little bit difficult to read, but all of that green were the areas that, in this case, green isn't good, but these are the areas of that were focused on strategic alignment and prioritization. So it was things like there was just a lot of duplication of work and effort. They didn't feel like they had a good handle on the roadmap. They didn't really understand why work was prioritized the way it was, or whether they were even prioritizing in the right way. And so there was a lot of issues around that. So that's actually what we honed in on with them, kind of as their starting point. And so we recommended a lot of different things in their backlog. Again, this isn't the full backlog, but just a sample of some items that were in there. So one of the things that we worked with them on was to build in more participatory budgeting, where you bring more people together to collaborate on how to prioritize the work. Quite frankly, that's a conference talk for another day, but if you're interested in learning more about that, I can certainly fill you in more after this. Also worked with them to help them build a better approach to building out their roadmaps that was much more cohesive and collaborative. And then how do you break down the work so that you could have the goals and the outcomes be more clear, working with them to limit their work in progress and so forth. So these were just a couple of examples of how we were able to work with these organizations, give them those better insights, because we were looking at this broad brush, you know, across a larger set of the organization, and also to give them their starting point. And so if we go back to Kotter's change model that I mentioned earlier, those 8 steps, this is just a slightly different view of it, but as you can see, it's divided into 3 different stages. So you've got, you're creating the climate for change, right? This is where we said, okay, your leadership team, by and large, is kind of the one that's sort of identifying and pushing for that. And then you get into that green area, and that's engaging and enabling the organization. And so that's where the LSRs really helped to engage the organization to identify what are the baby walruses, what are the icebergs, what do we need to do, where do we need to focus first, what's the best path through these waterways of our organization. And then from there, we were able to build that transformation roadmap and backlog. But then you also have to continue to build on that change. So that implementing and sustaining change, that's the repetition part that we keep talking about. Doing it again and seeing where did we get to, where do we still need to go, how have our waterways changed in that time. So that's where that becomes really powerful as a tool to really enforce this 8-step model. All right, so hopefully you're starting to kind of get an idea of like, all right, I think I'm understanding what these are, why I want to do them, how I do them. Other people are doing them. Maybe I should do it too. So we want to practice a little bit. So I'm actually going to stop sharing again, turn it over to my colleague, John, and we're going to move you into a simulation. I don't know if we want to stop and take another quick Q&A break and see if there's anything. I haven't really been keeping up with the chat.
Yeah, I think unless somebody wants to throw one in the chat now, I think we're good. We're definitely leaving time after the simulation to take a bunch more. So throw them into chat as you have them, and we'll do our best to answer every question by the end of this session.
All right, now is the fun part. This is where you get to play from home. All right, so here's what we're going to do. We are going to set you up into Safe Collaborate. And based on the number of people that we have on this Zoom, which looks like about 24, and it turns out 5 of us are facilitators, so that works out absolutely perfectly. We're going to group you into 2 different Zoom rooms, and it turns out there are 2 different Safe Collaborate rooms as well. So each room will have 9 or 10 people in it. And we're going to answer this following framing question, which is thinking back over the past 6 months and the roles you play, whether it's parent, caretaker, employee, etc. What has made it difficult for you to be healthy, and what has helped you to be more healthy? So obviously it's a totally non-work related question, but we figured everybody has lived through the last year, so it'll be good. So let me just kind of advance the next slide here, and then we're going to actually put these collaborate groups into the chat. And it turns out if we put them into the chat now before we split you into Zoom rooms, you're going to be able to see which one. You don't know what Zoom room you're in until we hit the button, so that'll come in just a moment. But before we do that, I'm going to actually show you the tool, because that way I can kind of instruct you on how to do it. This is what it's going to look like when you get in there. And when you get in, you shouldn't need a username or password or anything like that. So this is going to be the tool. There's your little boat. And you have anchors and you have propellers. If you look over on the left side of the screen, you see anchors and propellers. There are a couple ways that you can add them to the screen. You can actually just move your cursor over to anywhere on the screen and double click, and it will allow you to add the items. So for example, if I write John Test in here, and then you can choose from the drop down about whether you want it to be an anchor or a propeller. In this particular case, I'll make it a propeller, and I'll say, you know, something here. Oops, I even spelled that wrong. So there you go. And then you just create it, and it shows up, but it's a propeller. Now you can edit them as well. So you can change it, you can move it around the screen. And what we like to do as we're facilitating these things is that when you do, is you basically see the smiley faces. So if I put this here, if I hover over it, it says good. See that there? If I move it above this line, it says very good. So you can actually, and it doesn't, and honestly, I can put it down here and it says somewhat bad and it's still a propeller. So those are the types of things we clean up a little bit later, but you can edit it and make it into an anchor. And if it's all the way down here, it says very bad. So you can actually decide if it's really good, sort of bad, or really bad, just based on where you put it on the screen. Another way to add them real quickly is just to click this add item button up on the right. You see a little green thing, it says add item to the board. It allows you to do the exact same thing. So we're going to give you guys 5 or 10 minutes once you're into the group here. And we'll just allow you to answer that framing question, which if you forgot what it was like, what, looking back over the last 6 months, what has helped you stay healthy or has prevented you from being healthy. And so Kim and I are going to be in each one of these rooms helping you out as well after we get you broken into Zoom rooms. So are there any questions before we do that?
Right. So I think it would be good to repeat the framing or the central question one more time. And then, and then just to let everybody know, so John and I will have to be hopping around to the Zoom room. So, but yeah, you could just go ahead and get started adding things to the board, and then, you know, feel free to have discussions amongst yourself and just kind of put them in the board where you think they fit. And then we'll be popping in to help you out. And we'll
Kim and John, if you find that you need to be repeating any of these collaborate rooms, I stuck it into your Slack channel as well if you need to go find them somewhere easy, because I sometimes sharing these links inside a Zoom meeting is hard too. So if you need to find them there, they're in this chat, but also you guys will have them to share again if we need to.
When we break you out, we'll be in the room and we can give it to you there as well. So are we ready to do the breakouts? Great. Laura, are you going to push that, or do you want to do it?
Yeah, I was not planning on pushing out to breakouts.
I can do that right now.
Yeah.
We're going to create 2 breakout rooms. We're going to assign you guys automatically. And if Kim and I end up in the same room, we're going to have to swap ourselves. So we'll see you guys in just a second.
Okay, welcome back.
Very cool. All right, I'm going to actually screen share to show you a couple things. So we've actually downloaded all of the data from this exercise from both the breakout groups, and our colleague Laura is going to play with that for a little bit. But before we do that, there's a couple questions, and people wanted to see a few things around the tool. So I'm going to show you a couple more things now that we have everybody together. So let me screen share real fast, and I'll show you what we're looking at here. So if I go in and I look at some of these groups, so I'll go back to the group, one of these groups I was in, and maybe, yeah, turn it down. All right, so this is an example of how it looks. Obviously, you guys saw this one. You can also view it in a table mode, which is really kind of nice, where each one of these shows whether it's an anchor, it tells you what the name is. And I mentioned description earlier. So like perfect, like this one, Chicago winters adversely impact outdoor exercise. And then there's a little bit more description about brutal February, that sort of thing. So that's really, really cool. So we like to encourage people. And as we're facilitating, oftentimes as facilitator, I will look at these and try to encourage some folks to add some descriptions. And if not during the exercise, we'll do it in a brief afterwards, because the more description we get, the better we're able to figure out exactly what issues we needed to address. That's one thing. Another nice thing is, you can filter based on anchors and propellers, that sort of thing. Oops, we already had anchors. So propellers, hold on. Here we go. So propellers, and then you can also filter on, was it, somewhat good or very good? So there, for example, there's all your propellers that were very good, stuff like that. So things like that. Daily homemade lunch, excellent.
And so, John, sometimes I'll also do it by name, because that way I can look at what people have put in, and then if I need to ask them to add some more detail, I don't have to keep jumping back and forth, right? I can just say, hey, Ross, I need you to, put a description in for this, this, and this, for example, or what did you mean by that? So sometimes even just grouping it by the participants is helpful. And this is also kind of why we say the anonymity is not here, right, in this small session. The idea is that the small session is the safe space, because we need to be able to get those clarifying details, right? But then, as John said earlier, then that anonymity, comes into play when everything gets rolled up. So I just wanted to mention the name thing, just because I find it so helpful. So.
And somebody, while we were in that group, asked me a little bit about templates, and I had said that this was a template. So I just wanted to briefly show you some of the templates. So we were using Speedboat, which is this one right here. There's also Sailboat over here. Well, actually, Sailboat's private. That's one I had stolen from a long time ago. It got wiped out, so I still have it in my thing. But there's a lot of things you can do here. So you can talk about value streams. If you're doing scaled agile, there's a lot of PI planning things. There's also things for retrospectives, plus minus delta. There's risks, or there's roaming boards that necessarily have to be safe, but you can use it for roam. But there's also vision canvases, learning objectives, whole product, SWOT analysis. There's just a lot of things that are in here. This is the other one that you saw earlier that we used before, which was the one that had the rocks and the palm trees. There's your lean canvas. You have personas, vision boards, different things like that. So there's a lot of different ones, even like 6 thinking hats, which is a really cool tool. There's a lot of them that are out there, and empathy maps, which is also part of design thinking. So.
Yeah, and I do want to make sure that we are clear, John. Safe Collaborate is not the only way you can conduct a large scale retrospective, right?
Sure.
I mean, there's lots of different tools. You could even just open up a mural or Miro, or if you're in person, you could be doing it with, paper and Post-it notes and Sharpies. The reason why we are really keen to use this particular tool is because, as you saw in that board view that John showed you, you can do the filtering a couple different ways. You can filter by the names and all of that, and then the download to Excel. And then it just makes it so much easier, especially if you're dealing with hundreds or thousands of lines of data, because we're looking at every single line. And so if you've got a mural board and you have 500 sticky notes on it, well, guess what? Somebody's going to have to type that in. So we're not so keen on that part. So that's why we really like using Safe Collaborate, and just think that it for us is the best tool to be able to facilitate this. But obviously, and if somebody doesn't have access to that tool, but then they engage us, we have a license, so that's generally what we use, and then we can share those results. But I don't want people to feel like they can't possibly do this or use this technique because the tool is what's holding them back.
Yep. So we talked a little bit about facilitation. So, there's oftentimes you'll find teams that slow down, they're 5 minutes into it and they've run out of things to talk about. So there's prompting questions you can ask them. There's some data cleanup issues. People put things in the wrong area. You can ask them about, do they have it in the right place? You can ask them for additional feedback, different things like that. I just showed you how to view and sort results. So that actually generates new ideas. And we've put a couple sample prompting questions in here. I'm not going to go over these right now. They'll be in the slides that you get later. So for this exercise, these were some prompting questions, and these are some actual prompting questions we might use in some other areas. So I am going to stop sharing for a moment because Laura has some of her data available. So
right. And before Laura gets into the data, because honestly, I don't keep up with this, but Laura, somebody asked, is it a paid tool or can they use it for free? Do you know how the licensing is working these days by any chance?
It's evolving, but it used to be the only way you could get it was if you were a certified SAFE person and had taken classes. They have expanded that now where in the community platform for a pretty low cost per user. So I don't think they'll ever make it available for free, but I do know it's not very expensive through the community platform. And there's some nice templates and frameworks available in there. But like Kim said, I've done this with a lot of other kind of supporting tools as well. It's just the Safe Collaborate is the one that seems to scale. What I'm about to show you, I can do it the fastest if I use Safe Collaborate.
Yeah, and I mentioned in my group that you could do this on with different colored stickies and things like that as well. But it's just really hard to take those stickies and have to handwrite them all down again. So what Laura's going to show you just shows how easy it is, because I took this data, dumped it into Excel, and handed it off to Laura.
Yeah, so let me share what I've got.
And real quick, Laura, there's one more question I just thought I'd cover real quick, and then we can certainly get to some more. But Lisa had asked, is this, do you ever use this tool for in-person sessions, or would it be awkward? And so, and John did touch on it, but I know we were kind of talking about a lot all at once. So obviously we're all remote right now. And so we've been doing these in a much more remote forum. And so it works really well that way. Regardless though, before being in COVID times, if we had the opportunity to be in the sessions in person, we did that. And the reason for that is we're still using the tool. And so, yes, there are moments of silence, right, where people are heads down and they're putting all of their details in, but we want to engage people in conversation. So we want that small group, that safe space to be able to kind of bounce some things off of one another, because some of that discussion prompts other anchors and propellers as well. Now, I will say in our little group here today, it's a little bit quiet. That's okay, right? We don't know each other and all of that. So there wasn't as much like live discussion as I would normally expect there to be. But it's not awkward. You just want to prepare the participants that, yes, there is going to be a little bit of like a quiet mode while people are maybe heads down typing, but that doesn't, preclude them from being able to have those discussions. So, okay, Laura, do you want to do the honors and show us what you came up with?
My big caveat is that obviously I would even love to spend even more time on this than I did, but just to kind of give you a sense of what it looks like. So the gray columns, meaning A through E, just came as I haven't touched it. It's a download that came right out of the tool, and both sections of people are just grouped into one. So we can see this was group one. And as I scroll down, there's some group two. Everyone is in group one, but that's okay.
I think we messed up the,
yeah.
we did not stick the dismount. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah, well, that's okay. at least you didn't have 1,000 people. That would have been a little bit more challenging to see all the data in one place. But really, it's just, the first thing I did was, and I hadn't read them until this point here was, so I just went through and read the items. The item names and the descriptions, and it told me if it was a propeller or an anchor, and it told me if it was perceived by the person who created it as good or bad. So then I started with, okay, well, I think there's 3 different ways I might want to look at this. And so I just started coding it. It's like, okay, well, there's some themes here. Exercise, food, work, and communication were the 4 that came out. Super clear, right? Almost everything I think is going to fall into one of those 4 buckets. Then I thought, well, I wonder if this is all a work or all personal. And so I just thought, okay, what are the dimensions of these things? And so far it looks pretty split between what gets expressed in your non-work life and your personal side, and then what gets expressed through your engagement as a working person. And then I thought, well, if I put one of these on myself, which is like, hey, if I'm missing exercise time, right? My gym is closed. I think a lot of people put that on there. But to be fair, I have a high degree of control over whether I'm actually going to exercise or not, even if I'm not acting on that. So then I was thinking, well, what is the degree of control that people perceive they have? And whether this is amplifying a good or dealing with a negative. And so for me, I just put, hey, getting exercising in, you actually have a high degree of control over that. Whether you like getting up at 6 a.m. and going for a run or not is totally up to you. I do it and I don't like it. But that's how I've realized the only way I can get my exercise in is if I do it first. If I wait until later, it's just not going to happen. So those were 3 ways of starting to code this that I thought, okay, what's the scope of control? Is this a work or a personal thing? And then what are some of the themes that are being clear here? And if I were a researcher, I'd be thinking about, hey, if this is my student body, if I were working in a school, if this was my company, and I wanted to find out how are we managing the pandemic and how are people feeling, I might be able to reflect on this and say, you know what, I'm going to not only make a no meeting Friday because some of our clients are doing things like that, but maybe what I want to do is have an exercise Friday day where it's not only no meetings, but we expect people to not even be available because we want them to be, out and about sometime on Friday. So if people have 2 hours blocked off because they're going for a walk, that's what we want as a company, is to get people outside and getting some exercise time in the middle of the day where they might feel it's not culturally appropriate to block time because you're going to go for a walk. Right. So there are different things that I would be looking for, but this is just literally, it took me about 5 or 10 minutes to read all these and to start coding this. And I think within an hour, I could come up with some pretty cool graphs about, well, where are the heat maps? Is it pretty split between work and personal? Do we see a theme around food and exercise, right? Within an hour, I could tell you that. So that's where I go with this. And if you're interested in looking at one that's more complete, this is, I think, the one that Kim might have showed you earlier, but this one has more dimensions in it, right? So this is a little bit spent more time on here, and we can start to sort based on these items. And then we can also create, some pretty interesting visualization of the data, so we can help guide people who can take action against this, help guide them into identifying what are some items that might be high impact and low complexity or low cost to do, right? Those would be your low-hanging fruit. We will oftentimes use just an impact effort matrix to start to plot that. It's like, what is easy and high impact versus what might be harder to implement, maybe more expensive to implement, and much longer term in terms of seeing any benefit from it. So when you start to plot some of your actions that you could take around, well, what is easy versus hard, and what may be expensive versus not very complex at all, you can start to decide, where do we want to start? How can we have a win? And then how do we create that roadmap? And as Kim was talking, how do we create that map and trying to figure out, well, what's going to be potentially second and third? And then maybe every 3 to 6 months, we say, are these things still true, right? In this case, when the pandemic ends, maybe the difficulty around finding ways to exercise goes away. right? So that may not be an iceberg in everybody's life forever. We just happen to have it right now. So I'll pause there and stop sharing and see if there are any questions for the team, or if John and Kim, if you have anything you want to add.
No, I think at this point we're going to open it up just to questions. So if people want to come off mute, you can ask questions.
Yeah, to come off mute, maybe you'd have to raise your hand, and one of the co-hosts can take you off mute. You can put them in the chat too if you'd rather that way. But yeah, it'd be great to hear other voices. If you want to raise your hand, we can take you off mute and ask a question.
Oh, there was a question in here. How mature are the organizations that generally are interested in large-scale retrospectives, and typically how long have they been practicing Agile or Scrum?
And Leslie did raise her hand. I think that was Leslie's question, right, John? So I don't know if she has another question, but we'll have to find out.
Yeah, that was the same question.
So I'd say I'll answer the second
great.
part first. And I said they don't necessarily have to be practicing Agile or Scrum. They could be actually in an Agile transition. And we've done these exercises to help them to begin that Agile transition. So the answer to that could be 0. And as far as when you say mature, do you mean like Agile mature or other mature?
I guess it would depend, but yeah, generally when you are working with organizations, like how maybe just even from a perspective of how long they've been in business. Yeah.
I would say most of our clients, and Laura can probably answer this better, but most of our clients are fairly well-established companies for the most part. I mean, just that's been my experience, but I don't know, is there?
Yeah, that's the case for applied frameworks, although I've been doing this longer than I've even been at applied frameworks. And we've, done this with even smaller startups where the company may only have 20 people and all 20 participate in it. And really the thing that I think might be, it's my personal favorite reason for doing these is, I think for the most part, we can just generalize and say that people want the best for their teams and their companies. And they recognize that that means their own work life becomes awesome if those things are true. And I don't know anybody who likes to have things done to them, right? Even kids don't like that, but definitely adults don't. So I think finding a way that doesn't slow the process down and can actually honor everybody's experience and perspectives and gives everybody a voice in the process means that you're not doing things to people when you're trying to do any kind of process improvement, whether it be introduce Agile or scale Agile, or maybe there's other areas of process improvement that you wouldn't even consider as an Agile project, right? But again, getting people involved in identifying strengths and weaknesses and opinions and perspectives means that whatever decisions the company make can be kind of a line can be drawn between, hey, we made this decision because we talked to everybody. And this was the thing that came up as most important to most people, right? And so just being able to let people know that there's a reason behind decisions that are taken, and it includes having talked to a whole bunch of people, just gives you a whole lot of, support from the organization to start doing things that might be a little hard or a little scary or a little uncomfortable or all those things combined.
Great, thank you so much.
I think Lisa had a question. And so no, you don't have to be doing an Agile transformation to do something like this. I think you can do it in any types of organizations and any type of transformation that you want to do.
I would say too, for people who haven't used Zoom before, if raising your hand is an unfamiliar thing, if you look in your bottom of your Zoom window over at reactions, that's how you would go about raising your hand. You click on reactions, there's one that does say raise your hand. So if you're like, how do I do that? That's how you do it.
Wow, you learn something every time you're in a Zoom thing. I wasn't even sure how you do it.
I know, I'm presenting so often, I don't typically ask myself questions. So.
Oh, here's a good one. Kim, you want to take that one about how do you figure out who should be in a team together? And how do you think about management and non-management and mixing folks together? Why don't you talk to that one a little bit?
Yeah, that's a good one. And that kind of goes back to that safe space that John was talking about as well. And even with the media company in Minneapolis, Minnesota, we very intentionally separated out the leadership team from the rest of the folks. And it was really interesting and insightful because not only are you separating out the leadership team because you want to create a safer space for people to maybe more freely share. And as we said, when you're in that safe space, you're not anonymous, right? Like we can see that Lisa wrote this and Ross wrote that and so forth. And so we were asking questions and we're talking amongst one another. And so then we create that anonymity when we start to aggregate those results up. But someone's not going to be super honest if, you know, their manager or their manager's manager's manager is in the room with them, right? So obviously, you want to avoid that, but it was less about the safe space in the case of this this other company, because there you can analyze the results differently, and you can say this is what the leadership team is thinking, feeling, saying, and here's what the actual employees are thinking, feeling, saying, and we were really able to see where there was alignment and where there were some major disconnects. And so that was really powerful as well. And so typically, you know, if you have an established organization with Scrum teams, then you are going to want to try to keep those teams together. But again, it really depends also on what it is that you're trying to achieve. You know, it might make sense to have, you know, maybe you have UI designers spread across the organization on a Scrum team, but you might want to have all of them together in a group, in the small group retrospective, for example. So there's not necessarily a right or a wrong way, but I think it depends on what it is that you're trying to achieve. Because if part of what you're trying to achieve is like how well, you know, are those individual teams working, well, then maybe you want to keep the Scrum team together, but maybe not. So a lot of different ways you can look at that. But I highly recommend the safe space and separating out the leadership. See, I'm trying to keep up with the questions and see here. Is there a way to deal with
I was thinking about that question.
Okay.
Yeah, the lack of safety. I was thinking about that too, for a couple reasons. One is if you really wanted to be anonymous, which you could be in this tool, right? You know, the first person who logged in is letter A, and the next person is letter B, and you don't actually necessarily have to put your names in there. You guys did, and we appreciate that. But I've actually worked with clients that were very concerned about putting their actual names in there, and I told them, you don't have to put your name in there. You know, I don't care. But if you do speak up in conversations, somebody might recognize your voice. But you don't have to put your name in there.
Right.
Yeah, I think another. Oh, I'm sorry, Kim. And I think another effective way that we've assured people is that when people hire us to do this, leadership will often say, please give us the data without identifying anybody, right? Like, and so they can give the whole company assurance that, hey, we hired an external company to do this, so that they won't give us your names and email addresses and contact information. Like we really do want to create as safe of a space as possible. So that's another way. It's like you could always, in an internal perspective, you can have others from other parts of the organization help facilitate or guide your own organization's retrospective. So if you have a portion of the company that you want to do this with, you could have colleagues from another part of your company come and support the activity. So the facilitators are new people that don't work with these teams or these people. Sometimes just little things like that can help alleviate concern about who's facilitating and who's asking the question, is to try to keep it impartial.
I've seen that in the Scrum environment too, where a Scrum Master oftentimes will lead the retrospective for their own team. But sometimes it's good to switch it up a little bit and have Scrum Masters lead retrospectives for other people's teams.
Yeah.
We got a question.
Well, and talking about, well, I just wanted to add to Marielle's question there, because so Marielle, you're saying the leadership does want to have that frank conversation. And I guess where I would go with that is, you know, it depends a little bit on the culture of the organization, right? The leadership may want it, but are the employees ready for it? Do they truly believe that the leadership wants it, right? So there's maybe some of that. So you might have a culture where it is a little bit more free and open, and in general, employees are accustomed to that. But what I would say is if there is potentially a disconnect, that's where, again, the large scale retrospectives, by doing the small groups first and then compiling all of that in aggregate, now the leadership has something tangible to come forward and have those frank conversations with. Because now it's, hey, you know, we did this activity, we really want to make some positive change. This is what we're seeing. And now it's not an individual thinking it. Now the individual is seeing, you know, a graph that shows that 50% of the organization thinks it too. So now it kind of takes it away from, it now becomes that the organization as a whole is kind of inspecting that element of that data point instead of, oh, well, you're saying this and I'm saying this, and do they really believe me or do they really care, whatever. Now you're examining and inspecting kind of the data as that mediator, if you will. So that's kind of how I look at it, as use the large scale retrospectives to get to the point where you can then have the frank conversations about the results. Ross, I think you said, because I saw Renuka had her hand raised. I don't know if that was who you were referring to.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, Kimberly. But, you know, earlier I was the one who asked the question about the groups, whether you mix up the management and the team members. But with your answer that you gave to Marielle, yeah, you just answered you just clarified.
Oh, okay.
Thinking.
Hey,
So I was thinking of smaller group retrospectives and then bringing them together, because sometimes management, it will help management to change their mindsets and really realize, otherwise, you know, you're separate and it doesn't do anything. So it's really important to bring them together. And yeah, that was.
Right.
Thanks.
Great. Sure. And then Lisa was saying, I also wonder why leadership wants names. What do they plan on doing with that level of information, right? So, yeah, I think what Laura was saying is leadership was saying we don't want the names, right? Because you have that, sometimes you could have that implicit bias that we all have, and it removes that if you don't have the name. So typically we don't, when we're giving reports, we will sometimes share like the raw data, but the names are never in there because they're not needed. So good point. So I was gonna just finish up by sharing my screen one last time, because, you know, as I mentioned, 1 second here. So we're in this final thoughts and QA part, but you know, I had mentioned that we were going to have some cuteness overload in just a minute. So again, we can still have entertain more questions, but I did want to at least make sure that with the last few minutes left that we have in our session today, that we hit on a couple of these summary points, just hoping that we can drive some of that home for all of you. So obviously, we believe that it's a very effective way to inspect and adapt at all different levels. You know, this is not your mother's retrospective kind of a thing, if you think about it that way. It's like, obviously there's a lot of the same elements, but you know, the intent and the purpose and the focus and the scope is very different. So just want to make sure everyone's clear on that. And really, sometimes the information that you're able to glean from these, there's just no other way that you would otherwise get that information. And, you know, I actually put this fourth bullet in, you know, conversation that Laura and I were having, because it does require a little bit of a mindset shift, because it's very easy to say, like, I don't have the time to talk to hundreds of people or teams to make this happen. And it's like, how do you have the time not to? Because you're going to end up potentially going down the wrong path, not knowing what your starting point is, or, you know, missing key obstacles or opportunities. So that could end up actually costing you more time in the long run. So it does feel counterintuitive at times, but I really liked, you know, when Laura was mentioning that, I'm like, I'm putting that in. So, and then, you know, you do want to actually properly plan and execute these, as John was giving us some pointers on that. Really great discussion around, like, okay, well, who would I include and how do I want to break out these small groups? And let's make sure that we keep, you know, these folks separated. Let's make sure that we clearly explain to leadership why that's so important as well. And truly, the repetition of this is you can get value in just doing it one time, but there's such power in being able to continuously repeat this, and it you know, kind of fulfills that inspect and adapt loop over and over, and helps to give you new insights every time. So those were just some of the key points that we hope to take away. And then, you know, there's some of the cuteness part, because obviously we want to continue to entertain any questions you have in these last few minutes. And then, of course, we also want to thank you again for your time today. So Does anyone else have any other questions or comments that they'd like to share before we adjourn? You're all going to go out and try this now, right?
Yeah, well, thank you very much, John, Kim, Laura, for taking the time with us today. I put the link in there again because I mentioned these great learning series are a precursor to that Business Agility Conference coming up. If you want to find out more, links in the chat. But I know from today's session, I definitely took away some things around I think the change management you brought up, right? This is rooted in change, and change is important to every company regardless, and that culture that it breeds. The consistency piece of it too, or that preparation, putting that consistent lens around how you're looking at it. And then I think the categorization was the last thing that I know in my times of doing retros, at times, probably do a better job than others, but especially in a large scale thing, when you can really capture that data and categorize it and use it for much broader impact. That's really meaningful and something I want to figure out how I can do a better job and how I do that going forward too. So I learned so much about baby walruses and icebergs and large. I'm pleased.
Glad we can help.
Hopefully everyone else is too.
Great. Well, thank you again for the invitation to be here today. And I just want to give a shout out to Laura and John, my colleagues, for joining in this effort today. And,
wish you
all much success.
Anytime I can help, anytime I can, support my team members, and I love this whole large scale retrospective is a personal passion of mine. So I'm really glad that John and Kim are so good at doing this. That the clients that they work with, again, they've benefited so much from just the fact that these guys have done this so often, right? So nice job. I'm glad you guys had the chance to talk about it.
Great. All right. Well, thank you again. And I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of their day.
Great.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks,
Thanks.
Ross.
All
See you
right.
later.
Take care. Bye-bye. Thank you.